A dim winter sun breaks through the overcast over Bastogne, Belgium, turning the snow-covered fields a pale orange. For the first time in a week, the sky is clear. In a tree line on the outskirts of the besieged town, a German Panzer column grinds forward. Engines rumbling, frosty breath billowing from exhausts. Inside one Panther tank, Lieutenant Klaus Schroeder wipes frost off his periscope. He scans the horizon, alert. The past days of fog and snow have been the Panzer crew's ally, concealing them from enemy planes. But now, the sudden clarity of the sky sends a jolt of dread through every German tanker's veins. Suddenly, a low drone builds in the distance. The veterans in the column know the sound too well, the rising roar of aircraft engines. Achtung, Jabos! A voice cries over the radio. Attention, fighter bombers! The column halts. Gunners frantically crank their turrets skyward. Black puffs of 20mm flak fire begin speckling the sky. Schroeder's heart pounds as he swings his cupola around, searching above. Then he sees them. Silver-bellied P-47 Thunderbolts, 4 of them, nosing over into a steep dive. Sirens wail in Bastogne as the American fighter bombers scream down in single file. The lead P-47 hurtles toward the Panzer column, guns twinkling with muzzle flashes. A hail of 50 caliber bullets rips into the snow ahead, stitching closer. With a shriek, the Thunderbolt releases its ordnance. Wing-mounted rockets streak ahead of it, followed by bombs dropping free. Deckung! Take cover! Someone yells. Schroeder braces himself inside his steel turret as the world around him erupts in fire and thunder. But what comes next will demonstrate why German tank crews came to fear the P-47 Thunderbolt more than anything else on the battlefield. Just days earlier, Adolf Hitler had launched a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes forest, an operation that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. It was December 1944, World War II's Western Front. The German High Command threw 2 full Panzer armies against thin American lines, trying to smash through to the Belgian port of Antwerp. The bold plan relied on achieving complete surprise and on the weather itself. In the preceding months, Allied fighter bombers like the P-47 Thunderbolt had earned a fearsome reputation among German ground troops. The Germans knew that the Allies ruled the skies. In fact, by winter 1944, the US Army Air Forces and British RAF together had nearly 10,000 aircraft poised in Western Europe, from heavy bombers to agile fighters, a crushing aerial armada waiting for targets. Every German tanker and infantryman had learned to dread the sight of Allied planes overhead. As war correspondent Martha Gellhorn observed at the time, the snub-nosed Thunderbolt is more feared by the German troops than any other plane. But Hitler had chosen his moment shrewdly. He attacked in the depths of winter under cover of thick fog, low clouds, and relentless snowstorms. For a crucial week in December, the weather grounded the Allied air forces. The Luftwaffe, too, made a rare appearance to support the offensive. German columns, including elite units like Panzer Lehr Division and the 2nd Panzer Division, surged forward along icy Ardennes roads. They smashed through American positions and encircled the 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne. Under the gray, sunless sky, German tank crews moved in daylight with relative impunity, something almost unimaginable just months before in France. Bad weather was advantageous to the Germans. One account noted, the Ardennes mist shielded them from the dreaded Allied fighter bombers. Inside Bastogne, U.S. troops shivered in foxholes and old Belgian barracks, low on ammo and medical supplies. Outside, German units tightened the noose. On December 21st, German officers demanded the Americans surrender, to which General Anthony McAuliffe famously replied, "Nuts." The siege held, but barely. Everyone, German and American alike, looked to the skies. General Patton himself had his chaplain pray for clear weather, knowing Allied air power was the key to rescuing his troops. The Germans, on the other hand, were desperate for the clouds to hold. Many a Panzer crewman glanced upward each morning, hoping for snow or fog, anything but clear blue. They all remembered Normandy, where any clear summer day brought swarms of thunderbolts and typhoons hunting armored prey. In that campaign, Allied pilots claimed hundreds of German tanks destroyed from the air, and although later studies showed the actual kills were far fewer, the constant aerial harassment had been devastating to German morale and operations. In Normandy, Panzer units learned to only move under cover, at dusk, in rain, or under thick foliage. German crews camouflaged their tanks with tree branches and netting, and still they felt exposed. They'd seen what happened to those caught in the open. Rocket-firing Hawker Typhoons turned convoys into flaming wrecks, and P-47 Jabos, German slang for fighter bombers, short for Jagdbomber, strafed anything that moved. Even if a tank's armor wasn't penetrated, near misses could shred its fuel trucks, kill its escorting infantry, and leave it stranded. The fear of those screaming, diving fighter bombers had seeped into every German soldier's bones. Now, in the snowy Ardennes, the Germans were determined to avoid a repeat. They attacked under a shield of bad weather, a conscious strategy to neutralize Allied air superiority. For a critical week, it worked. German armored spearheads advanced dozens of miles. "It's our big chance," wrote one U.S. air commander anxiously on December 22nd. Without air support, the Allies were on their heels. The stage was set. If the skies cleared, the Allied Thunderbolts would finally be unleashed, and the German tank crews knew it. They steeled themselves for that possibility even as they pressed the attack. Many prayed the winter storms would last just a few days more. They would not. On the night of December 22nd, meteorologists at the U.S. 9th Air Force noticed a change. A high-pressure front approaching. By midnight, orders flashed to every Allied airfield. Get ready. All through the night, ground crews toiled in freezing wind. At Mourmelon-le-Grand in France, mechanics of the 406th Fighter Group loaded their P-47 Thunderbolts with bombs, wing-mounted rockets, and machine gun ammo. The pilots received pre-dawn briefings by lamplight. Many of these Thunderbolt pilots were seasoned tank busters who had strafed German armor since Normandy. Lieutenant Howard W. Park, one such veteran with a red-nosed jug, P-47, nicknamed Big Ass Bird 2, double-checked his maps in the flicker of a coal stove. Across the airfields, engines coughed to life in the cold. Patton's prayer had been answered. Clear skies were coming. Before dawn on December 23rd, the clouds broke. Allied pilots exulted. It was time to strike. And on the German side of the lines, sharp-eyed Panzer commanders like Klaus Schroeder saw the first hint of blue sky with growing alarm. The nightmare was about to begin. At 0530 hours, first light, the 406th Fighter Group's P-47s thundered down the runways in France. Within minutes, dozens of Republic P-47 Thunderbolts are airborne, assembling into loose formations. These fighter bombers are heavy, rugged machines. The Juggernaut, as some call them, each armed with 850 caliber Browning machine guns and carrying rockets or 500-pound bombs under its wings. The pilots have a clear mission: relieve the pressure on Bastogne. They know the 101st Airborne and elements of the 10th Armored are surrounded there. As the P-47 formations roar eastward toward the Ardennes, the pilots can see the snowy landscape below for dozens of miles. Some of them silently marvel. After days of flying weather so bad they feared their airfields would be overrun, now a crystal-clear day has dawned. On the ground outside Bastogne, Lieutenant Schroeder's Panther and roughly a dozen other tanks from Panzer Lehr Division have formed up for a morning assault. German infantry in white camo smocks trudge alongside the Panzers, their breath misting. The plan is to renew the attack on Bastogne now that it's daylight. The Americans inside are weakened. Schroeder's radio squawks with orders, but as he raises binoculars to scout the town's outskirts, he hears the droning engine noise growing. Then comes the panicked radio call. "Feindliche Jabos über uns!" Enemy fighter bombers above us. All at once, the sky teems with incoming Allied aircraft. Not just one or two, but squadrons. They arrive almost like flocks of predatory birds. P-47 Thunderbolts in pairs and fours, wheeling across the sky, glinting in the winter sun. With them come twin-engined B-26 Marauder medium bombers and even fast Hawker Tempests from the RAF. But it's the Thunderbolts that immediately peel into attack dives over the German armor. The first flight of P-47s dives from 12,000 feet directly onto Schroeder's column. Alarms sound and German flak crews spring into action. Self-propelled flak wagons, 20 mm and 37 mm A guns mounted on half-tracks, swivel and open fire, pumping the air full of black bursts and red tracers. Lieutenant Park, in his P-47, feels his plane shudder as he races downwards. Tracers whip past his canopy. Later he would write, "Streams of flak fire reached for me, sometimes within 3 feet of my wing surfaces." He holds his dive, lining up on the lead German tank. At 2,000 feet, he mashes the firing button. 8 machine guns thunder, spitting over 100 bullets each second, their tracers converging in a spark shower across the snowy road. Puffs of dirt and snow erupt along the column as rounds slam in. Park unleashes 2 5-inch rockets in quick succession. Whoosh, whoosh, then yanks his stick back hard. His P-47 screams over the treetops, barely clearing the forested ridge. As he pulls up, an eruption blossoms below. One rocket has struck a German half-track, and flames billow from it. Another rocket blows a crater in the road, showering a nearby Panzer IV with shrapnel. The German tank lurches to a halt, tracks blown off. Survivors of the half-track scramble from the wreck, only to be caught in the P-47's strafing run as Park's wingman rakes the area with bullets. Within seconds, chaos engulfs the German column. More P-47s roll in one after another in classic fighter-bomber Q tactics. They swoop down in single file, each aircraft unloading its rockets or bombs, then breaking away. The entire attack happens at terrifying speed. Schroeder's Panther is near the middle of the column. He watches in horror as a Thunderbolt's bombs straddle a tank ahead. There's a blinding flash. When the smoke clears, he sees that the lead Panzer IV has been flipped onto its side, tracks in the air, its turret blown clean off. Pieces of armor and road wheel are raining down. The crew of that tank never had a chance. Over the radio, confusion and shouting reign. Some of Schroeder's comrades have already bailed out of their tanks, unable to bear the thought of being trapped inside if a bomb hits. The inexperienced crews are the first to abandon their steel charges. Better to risk a leap into the snow than be incinerated inside a tank by a direct hit. He glimpses 4 crewmen from another Panzer running for the woods, stumbling in knee-deep snow. Schroeder grips his controls, torn between staying in the fight or ordering his own men to bail. Above, the Thunderbolts are coming in for another pass. Just then, several German flak guns find their mark. A burst of 20 mm shells riddles one low-flying P-47. The stricken plane trails black smoke and noses downward beyond the trees. A cheer goes up from some German infantry. One of the hated Jabos is down. But the relief is short-lived. There are many more P-47s overhead, and now even more are arriving. The U.S. 9th Air Force has thrown its weight into the fray. With Allied fighter cover sweeping the Luftwaffe from the skies, the German tanks are essentially defenseless against the swarms of fighter bombers. Over the radio, Schroeder's commander orders the column to disperse and seek cover. "Deckung nehmen! Panzer in Deckung!" Tanks veer off the road, trying to huddle under sparse tree lines or blend against hedgerows. Some crew use the old Normandy trick, throwing pine branches or even straw onto their tanks to break up their outline. In one case, a crafty Panzer driver steers his vehicle into a haystack in an open field, attempting to disguise it as a hay bale. But nothing escapes the keen eyes of the Thunderbolt pilots above. From altitude, one P-47 notices an odd, rectangular haystack sliding slowly along a white field, clearly a camouflaged tank. The pilot dives and strafes it mercilessly. Tracers tear the hay apart, and the tank underneath bursts into flames, revealing its true shape as it burns. All morning, this deadly aerial onslaught continues. The 406th Fighter Group's squadrons range across the Bastogne sector, hunting any German vehicle they can find. They spot columns of trucks and armored vehicles on roads and hammer them. They see German troops massing at assembly points for new attacks. Those become prime targets, too. For instance, at the critical crossroads of Baraque de Freiture, Parker's crossroads, north of Bastogne, a group of P-47s catches the 2nd SS Panzer Division forming up for an assault. The Thunderbolts swoop in with bombs and rockets. Explosions rip through the German ranks, and amid the smoke and confusion, the feared Panzer Division halts its attack. In fact, the 2nd SS delays its advance entirely, waiting for the Army's Jabos to leave before attempting to move. The surprise air intervention buys the U.S. defenders precious time, all because German commanders dare not advance under the watchful P-47s. Back near Bastogne, Lieutenant Park lines up yet another strike. By midday, he and his fellow pilots have refueled and rearmed for multiple sorties. Now carrying napalm canisters, a new and fearsome weapon, Park targets a patch of woodland where German tanks and infantry sought refuge. As his flight releases tanks of napalm, gelled fire rains on the forest below. An orange fireball blossoms among the pines, sending up a pillar of oily smoke. The trapped Panzer grenadiers flee the inferno, only to be cut down by strafing Thunderbolts circling like predatory hawks. By day's end, almost every German-occupied village around Bastogne was smoking, one report noted. Indeed, from Bastogne, the beleaguered 101st Airborne can see the distant columns of smoke on all horizons, evidence that help has arrived in the form of raining steel from above. Inside Bastogne, American paratroopers and tankers grin and pump their fists at the spectacle. "Those P-47 boys are raising hell today," an officer shouts amid the cheers. Among them is Captain James "Jammy" Parker, an Army Air Corps liaison officer who has been holed up in Bastogne throughout the siege. Finally, with radios working and skies clear, Parker is directing the airstrikes from the ground. He sends target coordinates to circling flights, guiding them to critical targets around the town. His professionalism pays off. Captain Parker directed the P-47s with great precision, an official report noted, hitting enemy armor within minutes of sightings. At one point, Parker relays that a German armored column is assembling west of Bastogne for a major push. In response, a covey of P-47s dives onto the location almost immediately. As they make their attack runs, the German soldiers below, already on edge, abandon their vehicles and scatter at the very sound of the approaching Jabos. This scene repeats itself again and again. Whenever the Thunderbolts swoop in, German tank crews often simply bail out and run, convinced that staying with their machines is suicide. Later analysis of battles like this revealed a striking truth. The rockets and bombs of Allied fighter bombers actually hit relatively few tanks directly, but the psychological impact was so great that crews sometimes surrendered their tanks intact rather than remain inside under air attack. It is sheer terror, the feeling of being hunted from above by an unseen foe with nowhere to hide. A veteran German Panzer gunner would later confide that the worst part of battle after Normandy was the Jabos. You could fight against enemy tanks or artillery, but against those fighter bombers, there was nothing we could do but pray and hide. By mid-afternoon on the 23rd, the carnage is widespread. P-47 pilot Lieutenant Ed Riley radios exultantly, "This is better hunting than the Falaise pocket," and that was the best I ever expected to see. Indeed, not since the August debacle in Normandy, when Allied air power decimated German columns in the Falaise pocket, have so many targets been laid out before Allied pilots. Near Bastogne alone, the 406th Fighter Group reports an astounding tally. By nightfall, they claimed 97 trucks and vehicles destroyed, 11 tanks knocked out, 24 gun positions silenced, plus dozens of enemy dead. These figures are likely inflated in the heat of battle. Smoke and chaos led many pilots to double-count wrecks. But there is no doubt that dozens upon dozens of German vehicles now lie burning in the snow. Wrecked half-tracks and Panzer IVs smolder on back roads. Staff cars lie crumpled in ditches, strafed to scrap metal. One German 88mm Flak gun position, which had been shelling Bastogne, is found blown to pieces by a direct hit. Along a tree-lined lane, paratroopers later discover a scene of absolute destruction. There were half-tracks and tanks literally wrenched apart by rocket and bomb hits, Gellhorn wrote. Gun positions directly hit by bombs. All around these lacerated or flattened objects of steel was the usual riffraff, papers, helmets, an odd shoe, clothing, and the hard-frozen corpses of Germans. German survivors who shelter in foxholes or cellars until dark are stunned by the ferocity of the Allied air onslaught. A Panzer Lehr NCO scribbles in his diary that night, "Dissect hell from above. We can only move at night now." Indeed, as dusk falls around 5 p.m., the German offensive around Bastogne has ground to a halt for the day. Fires burn high into the winter night, marking where convoys have been obliterated. Those German units that still have operational tanks pull them back into forests or gullies, seeking concealment until darkness is complete. Orders circulate from higher command. No further. Attacks until after nightfall to avoid the Allied fighter bombers. The daylight belongs to the Thunderbolts. Exhausted American pilots land back at their bases on the evening of the 23rd, wings lighter after expending their ordnance. They have flown multiple sorties and taken losses. Some planes didn't return. Flak had indeed taken a toll. The 46th Fighter Group alone lost several pilots that day to ground fire. Lieutenant Park noted grimly that it seemed we lost 1 in 4 in the lead flight every time, due to Flak, and in that week before New Year's, his group lost 10 pilots in action. The German anti-aircraft gunners fought bravely, and some Thunderbolts went down in flames. But there were never enough Flak guns or Luftwaffe interceptors to stop the relentless waves of Allied aircraft. One German grenadier, after enduring the day's bombings, wrote bitterly, "Our Flak is useless. For every plane we shoot, 50 more come." This is no exaggeration. The Allies flew hundreds of sorties over the Bulge that day. The U.S. 9th Air Force, British 2nd Tactical Air Force, and even elements of the 8th Air Force heavy bombers all joined in once the weather cleared. P-47 Thunderbolts led the charge in close support, their pilots driven by a determination to smash the German offensive once and for all. That night, as German tank crews huddled next to their idling engines for warmth, many were shell-shocked. The day's advance had been stopped cold. Some reflected that they had lost more vehicles to air attack and the ensuing panic in a single day than to enemy ground fire in a week. The psychological trauma was immense. One Panzer gunner could not stop shaking. He had leapt from his tank during an attack run and only later realized his vehicle hadn't even been hit. He'd abandoned it out of pure fear. Such was the terror that the Jabos inspired. As he lights a cigarette with trembling hands, Lieutenant Schroeder surveys what remains of his unit by moonlight. Several of his company's tanks are gone. Burned out husks or simply missing, their crews killed or scattered. The rest are low on fuel and ammunition. And now the Americans inside Bastogne, far from being crushed, seem invigorated. Schroeder knows that come dawn, the Thunderbolts will be back. The thought ties a knot of anxiety in his stomach. He murmurs to his men that they will attack again, somehow. But in his heart, he wonders how they can ever prevail if the skies belong to the enemy. For the German tank crews, the day's events have confirmed their worst fears. The 23rd of December 1944 marked a turning point in the Battle of the Bulge. The unleashing of Allied air power, spearheaded by P-47 Thunderbolts, blunted the German offensive at the critical moment. Around Bastogne, the immediate threat to the encircled 101st Airborne was dramatically reduced. Every planned German daylight assault was disrupted or delayed thanks to the fighter bombers overhead. U.S. officers inside the town openly declared that the airstrikes were worth 2 or 3 infantry divisions in the defense. Brigadier General McAuliffe's men gained breathing room to shore up their lines. South of Bastogne, on Christmas Day, General Patton's 4th Armored Division finally punched through and relieved the siege, linking up with the 101st. Patton himself credited the clear weather and air support as vital to Free Corps' success. Meanwhile, up and down the front, Allied jabos continued to wreak havoc on German supply lines and rear areas. Fuel depots exploded under bombing. One notable example, near Foy-Notre-Dame, a battalion of the 2nd Panzer Division, the German spearhead aiming for the Meuse River, had its only fuel convoy ambushed by Allied fighter bombers, P-38s and P-47s. 6 trucks and a precious gasoline tanker went up in flames, incinerating 3,400 liters of fuel. The 2nd Panzer's advance quite literally ran out of gas thereafter. Its lead tanks, only a few miles from the Meuse, were stranded and had to be abandoned. Such was the reach of air power beyond just the battlefield. By early January 1945, the Luftwaffe's last gamble, Operation Bodenplatte, had failed, and the German army in the west was spent. The Bulge offensive cost the Germans over 500 tanks and assault guns lost, plus tens of thousands of irreplaceable men. Many of those armored vehicles were destroyed or captured after being abandoned, victims of breakdown or fuel loss, but also victims of crews bailing out under air attack or hiding by day and losing momentum. Allied commanders later noted that once their fighter bombers entered the fray, the German advance slowed to a crawl, confined mostly to the hours of darkness. The P-47 Thunderbolt, in particular, became a legend among front-line troops. The German soldiers feared it so much that they called it the Jug, or Jabo, with a sort of anxious reverence. If a lone German unit saw a single plane in the sky, they would often assume an attack was coming and scatter or halt movement. A U.S. intelligence report from January 1945 even stated, "The snub-nosed Thunderbolt is more feared by the Germans than any other Allied plane," repeating Gellhorn's earlier observation. This was a remarkable turnaround for an aircraft that German fighter pilots had once mocked early in the war as a heavy milk bottle. By 1944, even those same pilots had learned to avoid duels with the P-47 because of its rugged durability and heavy firepower. But it was on the ground, in the minds of Panzer crews, that the P-47 earned its darkest reputation. One can measure the outcome of a battle in terrain gained or bodies lost. In the Ardennes, the Germans gained little and lost much. But perhaps the clearest measure of the Thunderbolt's impact was in the psychology of warfare. In Normandy, Mortain, and now the Bulge, Allied fighter bombers proved that even if they didn't physically destroy every tank, they could destroy the enemy's will to use their tanks effectively. German panzer divisions that might have maneuvered boldly by day were instead forced to creep cautiously by night, like prey skittering to avoid a predator's gaze. As a British study later found, the chance of a rocket actually hitting a single tank in combat was only around 4%. Yet what mattered was that every German tanker believed in that terrifying possibility of a direct hit. The result? Hesitation, delay, and sometimes outright panic. Indeed, during the Mortain battle in Normandy, Allied observers saw panzer crews abandoning completely intact tanks simply because rockets were falling around them. Fast forward to the Bulge, and that same fear reigned. Tank crews jumped out and ran at the first scream of diving Thunderbolts. The P-47 had become, in effect, a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. In the cold dawn of December 24, 1944, the Ardennes lay blanketed in a deceptively peaceful snow. Wisps of smoke curled from blackened vehicle hulks frozen into the landscape. A few crows cawed as they pecked at yesterday's battlefield. Lieutenant Klaus Schroeder stood by the wreck of his Panther, its engine still faintly warm. The tank had thrown a track in the chaos and been left behind as his unit pulled back overnight. Now he contemplated whether to scuttle it or hope to retrieve it later. As he pondered, a distant growl made him flinch, another formation of Allied aircraft passing overhead, heading east. Schroeder felt a mix of relief and resignation. Relief that, for the moment, they weren't diving on him. Resignation that his once proud Panzer division was now in retreat, hounded from above. All around the evidence was stark. Burned-out Panzers, twisted artillery, dead horses, and abandoned gear littered the white fields. It was as if a giant scythe had swept the land. The P-47 Thunderbolts had done their work mercilessly. Schroeder took one last look at his tank. A charred hole in its side from an exploding fuel drum made the decision for him. He turned and trudged toward the tree line where the survivors gathered. Overhead, the American Thunderbolts banked away, victorious. This was the fate of Germany's Panzers in the west. Wherever they roamed in daylight, the Allied fighter bombers were waiting. The German army's last great offensive had been stopped not just by grit on the ground, but by whirling death from the air. In the months that followed, Allied armies pushed into Germany itself, and the once invincible Panzerwaffe could only delay them, never stop them. Tank crews remained acutely aware of the Thunderbolt threat to the very end. Even veteran Tiger tank commanders admitted that when Jabos circled above, we felt naked and helpless. And so, the P-47 earned a fearsome honor, to be known and dreaded by those who faced it. German flak guns, Flugabwehrkanonen, might deter high-flying bombers, but down, in the mud and smoke of the front lines, it was the scream of a diving thunderbolt that truly struck fear into a tanker's heart. In those final months of World War II, the men inside Germany's steel beasts learned that death could come not just from the muzzle of an anti-tank gun across the field, but from the sky itself, delivered by a roaring, snub-nosed juggernaut. The next time a German Panzer crew saw a shadow cross the bright sky, they would remember the Ardennes and understand why the Allied pilots called their P-47 the Jug. Because once it was overhead, it poured destruction on them by the gallon. The camera pulls back from the snowy Ardennes crossroads, smoke still rising from shattered armor. In the distance, the drone of Allied fighters fades into the winter sky. The battlefield falls silent again, littered with the ruins of an ambition cut short. The German tank crews, those who survived, would never forget that day. They feared many things in war. Enemy tanks, dug-in anti-tank guns, and yes, anti-aircraft flak when they rode as infantry. But nothing quite matched the terror of the Thunderbolt's shriek diving out of the clouds, bringing a fiery end from above. Why did tank crews fear the P-47 more than flak? Because flak could scratch the paint or poke holes in an airplane. But a P-47 could turn an entire column of tanks into scrap metal and ash in minutes. Or even worse, trap men in burning steel coffins with no escape. Artillery and flak were blind. The Thunderbolt was personal, a hunter seeking each target out. It was the embodiment of Allied air supremacy, a constant, hovering threat that dictated when an enemy could move, fight, or even breathe. In the end, the German war machine learned that, no matter how thick the armor, death could always swoop down from the open sky. As the sun sets on the ruined Ardennes battlefield, we remember the words of a young American pilot who surveyed the destruction his squadron wrought. You can say the words death and destruction, and they don't mean anything, but they are awful words when you are looking at what they mean. Awful indeed, especially if you were a tank crew on the wrong side of a P-47 Thunderbolt. The legacy of that fear lived on, well past the battle, a testament to the lethal power of air support in modern war. In that clash of steel and wings, the men in the tanks learned to fear the sky itself, and the victorious Thunderbolts carved their place in history.